This is the Comics Alternative, episode 210, reviews of Black Eye, number 3, Ancestor, and Frontier, number 13. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul, and we're two PhDs, or in my case, in progress, talking about comics.
That's right. And on this week's episode, we're going to be looking at 3 new or almost new books. We're going to begin with an Indiegogo campaign for Black Eye, number 3. After that, we're going to look at Matt Sheehan and Malachi Ward's Ancestor. And then we're going to wrap up with the latest issue, number 13, of Youth in Decline's Frontier. But before we get into those discussions, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some great specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price, but sometimes even 50% off cover. But you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
Yeah, and one of the ways you can do that is to check out the bundles that DCBS has. And there are a bundle of bundles this month. If you go onto DCBS, look at the bundles on offer. They have, for listeners of the Comics Alternative, you may be interested in the Young Animal from Gerard Way bundle. Out from DC, as well as the new Vertigo bundle that is for October 2016, and you'll find multiple Marvel and DC bundles and a Valiant bundle, all kinds of good stuff at great discounts.
That's right. So whether you like your comics bundled or in single issue specials, you can't go wrong with Discount Comic Book Service. Be sure to check out their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Right.
Well, Paul, how are things going with you and with your podcast, The Paul List?
The podcast is a lot of fun, and it's been great to hear from some listeners of the Comics Alternative who've actually jumped over there and appreciated and enjoyed the weird little thing that I do, a solo podcast talking about different kinds of comics. But thanks for the plug, Derek. I appreciate that. Oh, sure, yeah, and we've mentioned this on the Comics Alternative a number of times in the past, and we highly recommend that you definitely check out Paul's podcast, The Paul List. And they can find it on SoundCloud, right? It's on SoundCloud and iTunes and Stitcher and all of that. There's probably some overlap in the audience, but I always make reference to, conversations that you're having or discussions that, say, Gwen and Andy are having about all ages books. So it's nice. It's nice being in the same universe. Right. And one of the things that I really appreciate about your podcast is that you're much more apt, I think, to go into mainstream comics than we are, but you look at the very esoteric indie things as well. So, I mean, I think that you have kind of a broader reach than we do, given our mission on the Comics Alternative. Yeah, as much as I love works like the reading list that we have for today, I got to do something with my stacks of Superman over here. So.
Well, speaking of the titles that we have on our list today, let's go ahead and get into this week's discussion. And the first book that we're going to be looking at is Black Eye #3. This is an anthology edited by Ryan Standfest, and it is published, or it's going to be published, by Rotland Press. So this is a first for the Comics Alternative in that we're going to be discussing a book that has not been printed yet. Now, in a way, that may be not that unusual because occasionally we will review a title that is maybe coming out in another week or two. But we know that it's definitely going to come out. But we've not yet reviewed a book that's been kickstarted or crowdfunded in any way before it's been finalized, right? And so the thing with Black Eye #3 is that this is a current Indiegogo campaign. And so, in fact, if listening to this review or a discussion of Black Eye #3, if listeners want to head over to Indiegogo.com and check out Black Eye #3, then we strongly encourage people to do so. This Kickstarter, I think it'll be going on until October 23rd. I don't know if it's the 23rd or the 24th, but as we're recording this, which is Monday the 17th, it looks like there are 8 more days. So I guess that probably is around the 23rd or 24th. Let me ask you, Paul, are you familiar with Rotland Press?
No, actually, I hadn't known about Rotland, or am I right that there was a Black Eye #1 and 2 that
Yes.
preceded this? Okay. I hadn't known about Black Eye before reading this.
Yeah. Now, I discovered Black Eye about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, and this was around the time that Robert Sicoyak's Sadistic Comics came out as one of Rotland's series, Rotland Dreadfuls. And in fact, the Rotland Dreadfuls are a wonderful series of small pamphlet comics. They run about 10 to 16 pages, and they're a tribute to the 19th century English penny dreadfuls. And each issue of the Rotland Dreadfuls it has one creator, right? And so people who have done this in the past have been, Robert Sicoyak, Onsmith, Chris Silla, Josh Baer, John Maggie, Ben Jones. And the most recent one that came out earlier this year, which is Volume 2, Number 5 of Rotland Dreadfuls, is Sarah Drake. And so I knew about Rotland Dreadfuls, and then I looked into Rotland Press, got in touch, I think it was late last year, early this year, with Ryan Standfest, talked with him about the possibility of doing a publisher spotlight with Rotland. And so he helped to educate me about the things that Rotland Press does. And it's quite impressive. They're a very small press. And that's why many of our listeners, probably most of our listeners, have not heard of them. But in addition to the Rotland Dreadful series, they also do this anthology, Black Eye. Now, issue number 1 of the Black Eye anthology came out in 2011. Issue number 2 came out in 2013. And this third issue, which I think is going to be the very last issue of Black Eye, is going to be coming out late this year. And again, they're doing the Indiegogo for that. And the reason why I say that I think this is the last one, because on the Indiegogo campaign, it says the final volume of the Black Eye series, the anthology of humor and despair from Rotland Press. So even though it's great to see another issue of Black Eye, it's unfortunate that this is going to be, at least for now, the last one. And the way that they describe Black Eye #3, and I'm looking at the Indiegogo page, it says that this issue is a departure from the previous 2 volumes of the series. Gone are the essays, the short fiction, the fake advertisements, and the proliferation of gag panels. The focus here is on the comics form. This newest volume includes 10 longer-form sequential narratives from 4 to 10 pages in length and a number of small page strips. The majority of the material was created specifically for this book, and there are stories translated into English for the first time. Black Eye #3 continues a deep concern with all things dark and absurd, and that definitely explains this, but builds from the premise that once you receive your third Black Eye, you will achieve a shameful enlightenment. And in fact, that is the subtitle of this volume, #3, A Shameful Enlightenment. So when I got in touch with Ryan a number of months ago about Rotland, he was telling me about Black Eye and sent me the first 2 volumes of this anthology. But they also have other publications. There are 2 tabloid prints that they've come up with, and one came out in 2015, and this was called the Rotland Inquiry. It's a tabloid news format with stories and essays that revolve around the Charlie Hebdo tragedy. And then they did another tabloid the year before that, Chasing Posada. So they do a variety of different things, but they don't publish frequently enough to where Ryan and I could coordinate a publisher spotlight on Rotland. So we thought we would use this opportunity when they are Indiegogoing Black Eye number 3 to talk about Black Eye, but also to talk in a broader sense about Rotland Press. So again, it's definitely something that people should check out. If you want to go to rotlandpress.com, you'll see the kind of publisher that they are and the kind of things that they publish. You can buy issues of the Rotland Dreadfuls that are still available directly from their press, and a variety of other things that they put out. So you definitely have to check it. They do cards, they do prints. A lot of this is from indie creators. Most of the names, I think, that are associated with Rotland Publications, our listeners probably aren't familiar with, but they may be familiar with some. But I think that this is a great way of discovering new talent, because there's a lot of great stuff that Rotland Press does. And Black Eye number 3 is just one example of this.
Yeah, Derek, I want to thank you, and I'm glad that you are in conversation with Ryan for introducing me to this anthology, because there's always one of the things that I appreciate about the Comics Alternative is I feel like there's a part of the work where we're reviewing, interviewing creators and things like that, but there's also a bit of I don't know how else to say it, but kind of a selection and a curation process involved, right? In the works that you talk about, you and Andy talk about, that others talk about. Not that there aren't works that are, very, very, let's say grassroots, that aren't, really rich and worth studying, but that there's just so much out there that, being able to identify the things that might be conducting an Indiegogo campaign that have real quality and that have real substance. I think it's part of what I come to the Comics Alternative for. And having had the chance to read Black Eye number 3, I mean, this is really good stuff. I think even if this is the last of these anthologies of humor and despair, my guess is that the humor and despair won't be ending, that Rotland will continue to put out really good stuff. So you've sort of, brought it to my awareness. It's on my horizon now. And Black Eye 3 has creators like Chris Wright of Black Lung, and as you mentioned before, Onsmith from previous. And so, as you said, I didn't know most of the creators on this list, but if folks are worried about, sometimes you support something on Indiegogo or on Kickstarter or something like that, and you don't know, despite the advertising pitch, what the quality will be. And I think having read this with you, I can vouch for this is some really interesting, intriguing, funny, despair inciting comics that are worth somebody's investment, worth taking a look at.
Yeah, exactly. And even though this may be the last volume of Black Eye, you can still enjoy the strange, absurd, offbeat humor that you can come to expect from Rotland Press through the Rotland Dreadfuls, but also, and just in time for the holidays, if you go to their website, you can get the Humor Noel series card set, and I have one of those. It's a set of 11 cards that features art from a variety of different creators, people like Chris Silla, John Maggie, Gregory Jacobson, and some of the others that we're going to be discussing today in volume number 3 of Black Eye. But they're kind of weird, offbeat Christmas cards.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Again, head on over to rotlandpress.com and you can find these.
Definitely. And I enjoyed checking out Rotland as a result of reading this with you. We do celebrate Christmas in our household, so I'll be expecting a satirical and somewhat dark Christmas card from you.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the specifics of Black Eye #3. And now we should mention, even though this book has not been printed yet, you and I have been sent a PDF of the book as it stands now. Now, there could be some additions to the interior, but I think it's going to be no more than minor tweaking. The prime content, I think, has already been set. So what you and I are reading or have read and we're going to be discussing is, for all practical purposes, the issue of Black Eye that is going to be coming from this Indiegogo campaign. And, as anytime we deal with an anthology, it's kind of a question of how we begin discussing it.
Yeah.
And maybe we should just jump on in it, not look at things chronologically. Maybe we should start with some of the pieces that maybe stand out to us the most, or names that we recognize that, at least for me, I kind of gravitated toward when I first got this, because I wanted to see what these creators were doing, and then the people that I didn't know and discovering them. I mean, how do you want to go about this?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I mean, I think the only other addendum to the introductory stuff is that, the edition we're looking at, and as you said, there may be a little bit more or less, but is 136 pages. Sometimes with an anthology, I'm always wondering, what length do I prepare myself for? So there are things here that are a page and things here that stretch to 6, maybe 7 pages at most. But they're also standalone. If I'm not incorrect, no relation to Black Eye 2. You don't have to have read Black Eye 2.
Right.
To, it's not a continuation of stories. Unlike the work we'll be talking about later, Ancestor, which was anthologized in Island from Image Comics, where that's a continuing story in multiple parts. I think everything here kind of stands on its own. So yeah, I think it's a good approach for us to kind of talk about what landed for us. Every anthology, is likely to have, some things that speak to us and maybe others that, well, in my case, go right over my head. But there are things here that I'd love to talk about. Yeah.
And a lot of these things are the kind of comics that would go over readers' heads. Again, it has that kind of sad, absurd feel to it, right? So it's going to come across to some readers as being very quirky, but this is the kind of humor that I absolutely love. And it's the kind of humor that I can see. Let me just get to one way that I suggested that we get into this anthology, and that is artists that we recognize, right? Some of the artists whose work I already knew, people like Joan Cornellà, Julia Gfrörer, Eric Haven, and Eric Haven, we've discussed his work on the Comics Alternative a couple of times before. He is perfect for this Black Eye anthology because his work has that kind of strange, offbeat, dark feel to it. And so he has a piece in here. Julia Gfrörer is the same thing. David Lynch with his Angriest Dog strip, the angriest dog in the world. It's been a long time since I've seen one of those strips, and I really do enjoy those. Onsmith, I've recognized his work in the past. Cornellà doesn't have anything on the interior, but he does the cover, and it's a very striking, recognizable cover. And anyone who knows Joan Cornella's work, he's a Spanish creator, will instantly recognize the cover of Black Eye #3.
Yeah, and probably hearing from that list, you already get a sense of kind of the worldwide origins of a lot of these comics. As Ryan mentioned, that there are some that are translated. And, the last thing to say, prefatory to actually getting to some of the pieces, is that, when I come into an anthology, having a sense of the overall feeling, being a shameful enlightenment, being an anthology of humor and despair, there's going to be bits of it that don't land or that are absurdist or surrealist. I mean, the sort of, only big piece of prose in here is there's a Luis Buñuel directions on how to make a dry martini. And I've never sat through a full Luis Buñuel film, but I do have a sense of that idea of kind of, not just interrupting the need for coherence or everything to be sort of neatly packaged, rather than, I think playing up our sense of anxiety or uncertainty I think these pieces do that. So it's sort of the kind of anthology that you don't read to be just kind of candy. It definitely kind of pushes those absurdist buttons.
Right. Now, you mentioned anxiety. There are some pieces in this collection that do have a, let's say, very contemporary, or at least somewhat contemporary edge to them that are more political than otherwise. And I'm thinking in particular of Johnny Sampson's Trigger Warning. And this is a 2-page strip. I guess you would call it strip. It's more of a 2-page spread on pages 32 and 33 of the copy that we're looking at. And the title Trigger Warning more or less tells you what this is about. Basically, it is a 2-page spread about a variety of different people, each of which is carrying a gun in one form or another. So you have, men carrying rifles, you have women carrying handguns, you have someone on a bicycle who's carrying a gun, you have someone who's homeless who has a rifle and a sign in front of him that says, "Homeless, need ammo, God bless." A little girl with a gun, a grandmother with a gun, a bird that is pooping while sitting on a gun, a dog with a holstered gun, a mime with a gun,
right?
Which is one of my favorites of this strip. And 2 kids playing ball with guns, and then the punchline in the lower right on page 33 is one guy says to another, "Don't you feel so much safer?" And then the guy who responds, who has a USA T-shirt on, says, "No, I forgot my gun." So, and there are some of the pieces in Volume 3 of Black Eye that do have a political edge like this, but I think most of the contributions don't. Not that they're not political, they're just not as overtly pointed.
Sure, they're more existential or something.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just another example of the wide variety that you'll find in this. Now, I was not familiar with the work of Johnny Sampson before, but I really enjoy his work. And I wasn't familiar with this other creator, Penelope Gazin. I don't know if it's Gazin or Gazin, Gazin, but she has a 1-page strip called Hellhole.
Yes.
That is rather vulgar, but it's funny as all get out.
Yes.
And the setup here, how do I describe this without getting too vulgar? Basically, you have it looks like a boy. It could be a man who has the
teenager
look of youth.
maybe.
Yeah, because he has a little cap on his head.
It's a dunce cap. It's a mini dunce cap.
It looks like a dunce cap, right? But it's not tall. It looks more like a horn than a dunce cap. But
sure.
He passes a naked woman who has her legs spread, and he looks into her vagina. And once he looks in, you get a sense of what he sees, which looks like a scene from hell, right? So
it's have the titular hellhole, yes,
exactly. Body splayed, naked, being whipped, and all that. And he pulls back. He recoils in horror. And then in the last panel, it is basically the punchline, and you have the words at the top. And you see his member enter the hellhole, so to speak.
Right.
So after witnessing what he did, nonetheless,
here we go.
He partakes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of humor that you find in Black Eye number 3.
Yeah, that's a great sampling. And actually, even the piece in between, I think those two are great sort of representative examples. And I'd say artistically, the Trigger Warning by Johnny Sampson is almost like EC artist cartooniness,
Yes.
And then the Hellhole, I don't know how to describe it. I feel like it's perfect for
in terms of the art style.
Yeah. But my point being that there's quite a range of art style as well as subject, as you described, and I think those two are good examples of the kind of range. I mean, this is what I love about an anthology, right? It's just kind of seeing things that you almost don't know at every page turn what you're going to encounter. So, yeah.
Now, the page 39 that follows Hellhole is one of several pieces by Paul Nudd, whose work I wasn't familiar with before this. And these are occasional one-page illustrations that occur throughout Volume 3 of Black Eye, and they're more patterned than anything, but they're patterned on, let's say, on page 39 it looks like insects and germs, and other times it looks like parasites. These are more illustrations, right? So they're not narrative comics in any way. But they're like in-between pieces that transition us from, one short comic to the next. But there are a variety of creators like Nudd whose work appears multiple times in Volume 3. One is the aforementioned, David Lynch with The Angriest Dog in the World. There are a number of Angriest Dog strips. And then another one, and I wasn't familiar with this before, is Pierre Lapolice's The Supremacist. Those strips, again, these are one-pagers that occur throughout this volume.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen them before, but there's those. There's one other I think that comes to mind right away, a set of one-pagers that repeat. But The Supremacist by Pierre Lapolice, for instance, I'm looking at one on page 18 where there's a hand on a Bible as if in a swearing in or something like that. We're going to do bad things, but we are not bad people, is the caption underneath. And there's seems to be I'm not sure if you know what the meaning of that sort of bent ring finger means with the hand on the Bible, but yeah.
Well, what does it mean?
I don't know. Actually, I was genuinely asking.
Okay. See, you thought it was bent. When I looked at it, I thought that maybe the finger was cut off.
Yeah. Well, that's what it looks like than bent.
Huh.
Yeah.
Now, another one of the recurring pieces, one-pagers, that we see throughout this volume is Sammy Stein's pieces. And I don't know exactly what to call them. They're the Headstone comics. And basically what you have is a series of panels. It begins with, it looks like the headstone of a grave or maybe just a block of marble that could be made into a statue of some sort. And the block breaks down to reveal something underneath, and then that breaks down and or transforms into something else entirely that is part of the punchline at the very end of this one-pager. And, for instance, on page 53, we start with this block that breaks down, and underneath what comes to the fore is an egg shape, which looks very smooth. But then in the last couple of panels, the egg cracks and opens. Now, someone listening to me just describe that is wondering, where's the humor in that? But it's kind of an offbeat, subtle humor, right? Because here you have this block that breaks down into an egg, then the egg breaks down itself. Why? Well, because it's an egg, right? Because it's very fragile.
Right. Yeah, or another instance of this recurring strip by Sammy Stein is again another 16-pager that looks like a block of marble that gets turned into a Roman column that eventually becomes a ruins that eventually becomes a museum piece. So it's sort of like this cyclical process of something having value, not having value, having value, not having value, as it sort of shapes through human manipulation or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about some of these shorter one-page pieces. Of the longer comics in this volume, which ones stand out for you?
Let's see. I think that the one actually in between the two that you mentioned, called Shady, and the I is sort of dotted out, but Shady Bitch. That was a bit of a thought-provoking piece. There's a bearded character, I think a sort of transgender bearded character, who announces that they're joining social media so they can mark their territory in a verbal way. And so with a loudspeaker and a sandwich in front of them, they're sort of just commenting on people passing by or giving updates. So, this sounds like a social media, this thing somebody posts on Facebook, but they're shouting, "I'm eating a pastrami sandwich," or declaring somebody as they jog by, "You're fat," right? So, or Mark is sleeping with his ex again, and he's in bed with his ex, and they're commenting on it with a loudspeaker in the bedroom. And so it's a bit of a take, I think, on this the social media world we live in, where relationships are all weird because we just put things kind of on blast. And then I thought that was a funny, ironic take on the way that we interact socially now that we are all mediated by our cell phones and Facebook Twitter followers or whatever.
Yeah, and the way that this strip ends is with our main character, this I guess this unnamed transgendered figure, right, who ends up meeting Charles Darwin, and they drive off into the heavens.
Right.
Now, what does that have to do with social media? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Right. I do feel like a lot of these pieces, I spent sometimes a good 5 minutes just kind of sitting with them and soaking in and reading into them, and some of them almost said back to me, you're overthinking it, and so that's part of the great experience of reading these, short or long. They sort of hit you. Sometimes there's one piece by Onsmith called Empty Hollow Thud. And, and sometimes that is the way they hit you. It's sort of like this cloud of phenomena that are just, echoing back or mirroring back these aspects of our lives. And sometimes they do kind of thud. But I think that itself is a kind of effect that it's meant to have, and you're meant to kind of sit with and chuckle or, wring your hands or whatever.
Right. Now, there's some, like, for instance, that Onsmith piece that you mentioned, and then The Shady Bitch by Brecht Vanderbroek, that it's strange, it's absurd, but you can more or less ferret out what's going on, right?
Right.
I mean, you're still scratching your head, but you can understand things in some manner.
Yeah.
But then there are pieces like Andy Burkholder's Flown Away Swan. And this is, what, about 4 or 5 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. I mean, we get this first panel with a humanoid figure with big fangs wearing a T-shirt that says "Wasted day go by." And then in the next panel, the T-shirt is in the water somewhere by itself with the words "Wasted day go by" above the panel in the word box, but it's not on the shirt anymore. And then the third panel is this character with the fangs without a shirt at all. And then we have a series of other panels. Every now and again, the words "wasted day go by," figures, a horse, a guy drinking too much, another weird, freaky smile, a frowning face. And this goes on for several pages. And then when we get to the last page on 58, at the very top, "Wasted day go by," and we have a guy looking down at the angry face, the face with the fangs. He has a T-shirt that says "trope" on it, and trope is an allusion to something in an earlier panel of this strip. I don't know what the hell is going on here, but it's intriguing.
I literally wrote in my notes, "Ask Derek, the English professor, about this one." I do think, though, as you were describing it, I thought of, it's actually immediately preceded by one of the Sammy Stein pieces, the one that you described of maybe a headstone or maybe a piece of marble or whatever turning into the egg. And so there's a way that there's these little various bits, as you describe, almost feeling random, are cycling back and forth between being crude art and being wall art, or being something that exists on a T-shirt and suddenly becomes these tossed away words. So I wonder if there's something here about this sense of I don't know, cherishing 1 minute and then just something becoming debased, which is itself actually the seed for something becoming art that you put it on a wall again.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I would be interested to ask Ryan, the editor and the publisher of Rotland Press, because he could give us a sense of the curation of the pieces in Black Eye. Is he putting them together in a particular order for a particular reason? Right. Is he varying the representations? Does one comment or play off of the theme or the images of another? And sometimes you can perhaps ferret out some of the juxtapositional meaning, but at least for me, when I see what I think is some kind of thematic or image-based linkage, I'm wondering, now, is this intended by the editor, or am I reading too much into it?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, again, that's another question you bring to an anthology. How much coherence is there in a an edition of Moem or in this case, for instance, I wondered a lot whether there was a kind of editorial, I don't know, mandate or decision or agreement about color. So it's black and white, but there's occasions, for instance, in Panic Fables by Alejandro Jodorowsky, where there's a spot of red. I think there's one other where red enters the picture. So I wonder how much there's also parameters, not only thematic ones or at least sensibility wise, but also, with the diverse art styles here, let's agree we're doing black, white, some grays. And if you want to throw in a splash of red, the other one is The Witch Who Wore White.
That's right. Yeah, that's a weird one.
Makes heavy use of red. Yeah. So because, you have creators, artists really going in wildly different directions with whatever the seed is. But yeah, I'd be curious to ask Ryan, what was I don't know, how do you set off, or how do you, coherence is the wrong word, but how do you sort of explain the mood that then gets the artists going on their respective individual paths?
Right. Now, you mentioned the Jodorowsky piece. Now, this is something that was originally published in October of 1971. And, every now and again, at least in the previous 2 volumes of Black Eye, they would have these older pieces, either comics or prose, that were republished in Black Eye. And so this is one example of that here. I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite pieces here, just because I love his work, and that is Eric Haven. This begins on page 86. It's a 4-page strip. It's called This Hollow Shell, The Origin of Mr. Peanut.
Right.
And
it's a good one.
And this is just wild. Basically, you have some guy who is wearing a top hat and has a monocle. He's running with a big peanut in his hand. And it begins in the first panel, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, 1913. Millionaire industrialist Carson Dryduck sprints for his house as if the devil himself was at his heels. And, Carson Dryduck is yelling to this peanut, "Hang on, Matilda, hang on." And he brings this peanut into his house and lays it down on a table and says to the peanut, "Push, Matilda, push. I can see him. I can." Oh, and then Mr. Peanut comes out of this big peanut. So apparently he's been birthed, right? So a shaky Mr. Peanut with, the monocle, the hat, and the cane says, "Father?" And then the guy yells, "It's horrible, an abomination, a grotesque human peanut." And at this point, Mr. Peanut, takes his cane, which is actually a sword, jumps up, stabs the guy in his eye, and he says to him, "That's Mr. Peanut." And as the guy's screaming, he falls in the fireplace, the house catches on fire, and Mr. Peanut runs away.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the point of this? What happens? It doesn't matter. It's funny.
Right.
You got Mr. Peanut being birthed and stabbing a man also wearing a top hat and a monocle in the eye.
Right.
That's the essence of humor here.
Right. And actually, in that opening panel of the story, as the monocled man runs off with the peanut has a thought balloon or a thought bubble with a heart.
Oh, that's right.
It's sort of, it's one initial feeling is this affection for this monocled man who has taken ownership and love, I guess, of Matilda.
Yeah, but again, I really do enjoy this. This is one of my favorites. But I like the comics of Eric Haven, and that Eric Haven used to work for MythBusters.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. A really interesting little tidbit of information there. So the link between Rotland and MythBusters.
Yeah, one of the things, we're not going to be able to do justice to all the pieces, and some are kind of provocative in ways, and we could spend forever sort of even talking about single pages of this. There's one by Alexis Beauclair, for instance, on page 25 that is basically it looks like teeth being all pulled apart and then put back together again.
Yeah.
things like that. Or this one pager by I think it's Anna Haifisch. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name, but called Californian, which is just 4 wordless panels that are very true to life, to what California feels like, I can say as a Californian, in very absurdist terms. There's like an elephant-headed person apparently running away in tears from an audition at a Warner Brothers lot or something like that, because there's a Bugs Bunny picture in the back, and so there's just so much to unpack, and it just feels like a collection of richness is the wrong word, because they're all, again, filled with a kind of dread or absurdity or despair or cynicism, but there's just a lot to dig in this book.
Right.
Yeah.
One of my favorite early ones is, it begins on page 12. It's David Sandlin's "Do You Deserve an Elevator to Heaven?"
Right. Right.
And it's basically about a group, people. Do you deserve heaven? And, do you aspire to prosperity and its rewards? And the punchline at the end is that this ascension seems to be nothing more than, aliens taking away humans or taking away human life. And that comes right before that Californian piece that you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. And this one, not unlike the piece at the end called Creation by Martin Rowson. Do you know Rowson's work? I think,
Where's this? What page?
This is page 116. And it's called Creation.
Oh, yes. He's done a number of adaptations of of The Wasteland, and among others. But I haven't seen much of Rowson's work in a long time. Now he's a political cartoonist in the UK, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And this definitely has a political cartoonist feel to it, both in terms of its subject matter and the art.
Right, the style. Right. And really sort of a if you could call it a theological cartoonist, because a take on creation, God making the heavens and the earth, and also filling the human mind with ridiculous ideas in the form of what looks like a perhaps British bald old man in a suit with unsavory sort of behavior.
There's a lot of liquid in this strip and oozing. So there's a lot of shitting and pissing and boogers and spitting, as well as other bodily fluids. And this basically is the stuff of creation.
Yes, that's exactly. It's God crapping into a head. The stuff of creation, and probably in some sense the stuff of religion, is the statement, which brought me back to, as you were talking about Elevator to Heaven, and the page that precedes that by William Shedlich. Forgive me if I mispronounced that, but it's a very designed page that's quoting Matthew 18:9. If your eye offends you, if thine eye offend thee, you have to do it in the King James. Pluck it out and cast it from thee. And there's a cartoon of a person having plucked out his eye. Mm-hmm. And so there's some good takedowns of the pretensions of politics, religion, sort of absurdity of our life kind of thing.
Right. Another religiously tinged piece is one of the longer ones. I think this is a 7-page strip by Chris Wright, The Devil and Christopher Ibid. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that deals with, temptation, the nature of evil.
Yeah. 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 There's so much to say. As I said, there's just, feels like we're not going to give every work its due. Except to probably encourage folks to pick up the whole. I think it's a really well done anthology.
It is, and it's one. I have to say, this is the first time I've ever backed anything on Indiegogo. Have you?
I have, but I don't even remember what it was. But,
okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is because, they've set a $5,000 goal, but it's marked as a flexible goal. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. And as of today, in fact, let me refresh my page just to see where they are. They are 43% toward their $5,000 goal, and I've backed them. But I'm wondering, they have 8 days to go as we're recording this on October 17th. And so in the event that this doesn't reach the goal, and it could, we hope it does, but with a little less than 8 days to go, we're not even halfway there yet. I didn't know what a flexible goal was in terms of Indiegogo.
Right.
So,
yeah, I'm not too sure either, and I do hope. I assume it means that these artists have had a chance to have their work, given their due and so on. But I guess one of the things that I really love about things like Indiegogo campaigns and Kickstarter campaigns is, and I'm on about this sometimes on my own podcast, but what I love about comics is that they are such a powerful visual medium that sort of anybody with a pen can create. And I think that there's something really important about the perpetual undergroundness of comics, and stuff like Patreon and Kickstarter and Indiegogo allow us to support that directly, where we don't have to be rooting around in shops that you can only find if you're a San Franciscan or something like that to find work like this. And so I guess I know who I'm talking to when I enjoin our listenership to check it out, and to see if it's something they want to invest in and support.
Right. So if they go to Indiegogo right now and do a search for Black Eye, you can find that you can get the book, back it on Indiegogo for $15. But I would recommend, if you're going to get the book, then go ahead and get the book and some of the perks. So for $25, there's an option of getting the book and the Humor Noel card set that I previously mentioned. Also for $25, and this is what I got. This should tell you something about me. You get the book plus the chapbook. It says you will receive 1 copy of Black Eye number 3 plus 1 copy of the pornographic chapbook, The Sightseer's Complement, exclusive to backers only. So that's what I got. Also,
sounds good.
Yeah, also for $25, you can get the book and a Ben Jones print, or $25 for a book and a Paul Nudd, whom we previously mentioned, print. So there are a lot of options here, and we highly recommend that you check out Black Eye number 3 on the Indiegogo page.
Yep. Just like David Sandlin's Elevator to Heaven says, aspire to prosperity and its rewards. Onward and upward. Right.
Well, that was a nice way of ending our discussion of Black Eye number 3. So let's move on to the next title that we're discussing this week, and this is Matt Sheehan and Malachi Ward's Ancestor. And this is coming out later this month from Image Comics.
Yeah, it was originally, as I mentioned earlier, anthologized in Island, which is, Image's anthology comic that's been, I think it's in its 11th issue or so. And I see that, similar to other anthologies like your Dark Horse Presents or something like that, things that have been serialized are now spinning out. For instance, the Emma Rios comic. Is it ID? I think it's ID. Yeah, it's about identity. So that sort of was spun out to its own collection, trade, graphic novel kind of thing. And I think that's the case now with Ancestor.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask how many of the anthology stories originally appearing in Island have gone on to become its own publication. So you mentioned the Emma Rios, and then there is a Dalrymple, Farrell Dalrymple,
right.
Collection that I think is not out yet, but it's going to be coming out in the next month or so from Image. And so this is yet another. Now, what we have as Ancestor originally appeared in issues number 3, 5, 7, and the most recent, I think, 11 of Island. Now, Paul, do you get the Island series?
I did up through about 6 or 7. And I don't want to make this a kind of, well, maybe I will, a kind of critique, which is that I think it's hard for me to follow anthology. Following comics month to month is tough. Following stories that appear every 2 issues, or in the case of Ancestor, for instance, the conclusion came much later. When I started to realize that a lot of these would be collected the way that they are, I started realizing I think my with the number of comics that I read, sustaining attention and remembering what's going on, I'm going to wait for some of these to come out individually, because otherwise it's just too hard to follow month to month. But I appreciated the effort that Brennan Graham and company were doing in Island in taking a big platform like Image provides and doing this kind of comic. Like, I loved that, Image has done that kind of stuff in the past, but it tends not to be probably its biggest seller. But I'm glad that they are doing that kind of stuff.
Right. And, this is very much like a Dark Horse Presents, although Dark Horse Presents has a much longer and varied background when it comes to putting things out that, in pieces, anthology format, that later come out as, if not books, then single issues. And I know that that's one of the ways that they have, so to speak, test-driven certain series. I know that the Resident Alien was something that they did that to, right? So for the first 3 volumes of Resident Alien, not with this most recent, the very first issue, which I guess you could call the zero, it's the 0 issue, but for all practical purposes, the first issue, appeared in maybe 3 different installments of Dark Horse Presents. And in a variety of other titles, they do the same thing. This is different, though. So this doesn't strike me with Island that they're anthologizing stories that are set up to longer series, ongoing miniseries or even longer series, but that they're anthologizing stories that are, let's say, done in one standalones, right? That could be books like Ancestor.
Yeah. I mean, Dark Horse is the anthology that launched 1,000 ships, of tons of work that we now have in very long form. It seems like Island is creating more of these self-contained stories. I think what's going on, though, is that it's a entry point for a certain kind of creator that, whatever kind of work that they're doing, we're not looking at your future Nexus or your future Concrete like with the earlier Dark Horse Presents, but but really just these sort of creators with, again, a kind of more offbeat or more independent than, say, a Greg Rucka or a
or Richard Corbin.
Right? Yeah. So it's a
Mike Mignola.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So we don't have the same kind of established names, although we do have some established names in Island. Sure. For instance, Brendan Graham. This is in many ways his project, and he has been in Island as well. Emma Rios is someone whose name that I think all listeners should recognize. Now, when it comes to Ancestor, let's start talking specifically about this new book.
Yes.
Now, this is by Matt Sheehan and Malachi Ward. I've known of Malachi Ward's work before, and in fact earlier this year Andy Wolverton and I, when we did our publisher spotlight on alternative comics and others within its co-op, discussed Ward's From Now On, that collection, which is phenomenal. We both loved it. So I was familiar with Malachi Ward's work, but not Matt Sheehan. And if I've seen his work before, I'm not remembering this. Have you read any of Sheehan's work?
No, I hadn't, and I didn't get a chance to look up his past works. There is a bit in this book, and I don't think it appeared in Island, at the end where they talk about process, and it's good for the ways that it kind of resists the usual process piece. There's a bit of the usual process piece, but it's again offbeat in its own way. But it seems like Ward and Sheehan have a very tight working relationship. This isn't somebody a million miles away sending a finished script to an artist to draw. It's really kind of a back and forth collaboration, quite tight, it seems.
Right. So this piece that you mentioned, Matt and Malachi's process, which looks like it begins with an image of Carl Sagan.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird, but he doesn't say anything that you would make you think that it's Carl Sagan, right? He doesn't say something about, billions and billions of comics. I mean, this is a Carl Sagan figure that says, to make a comic, you must first have some comic seeds and water. Huh? Right. Well, that's part of the humor. But it strikes me that this piece, Matt and Malachi's process, is something extra that those who have been getting all the issues of Island would not have gotten. So more of an incentive of getting this new book, Ancestor.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's 3 pages, this little process piece, and the first page is almost in Microsoft Paint style pixelated drawing.
Now, I have not gone back to compare the copy of Ancestor that you and I currently have, which is a PDF. This is something that Image sent us a few weeks ago, in fact.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that this is what the finished book will look like, but who knows?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I haven't compared this PDF to the actual 4 installments in Island. I'm assuming that there's not much, if any, change in the art. Although I would like and I don't think that I ordered this through DCB service, so I guess it's a good thing that I got a PDF of it to prepare for the show. I would hope that one of the things that they would change in the book publication that's different from Island is at the end of each chapter, remove the to be continued part.
That's right. That's still there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's in this PDF. Now, who knows? For all we know, in the printed book, they've removed the to be continued at the end of the first 3 chapters.
Right.
That definitely worked with the Island pieces, but they're unnecessary in the book. So when I do see this book finally come out in another couple of weeks, I want to look at it in the bookstore just to see if those to be continued designations are there at the last panel of the first 3 chapters.
Yeah. That this is kind of a glimpse behind the scenes at us being able to review books, and thanks to Image for sending us this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for them to be taken away. Although I think that more so than other stories, the sort of installment serialized nature of these chapters is it feels like a story where each part, I mean, that's probably true of every story, but each part seems each part seems to take off on its own in quite a departure from, it's a continuous story. There's a continuity in the story, but each part does have a sense of like, wow, this would be a very different installment. We're going to a very new place here.
Okay. Now, since you're talking about each installment in some ways kind of standing alone and each subsequent one going into a different direction than the previous, let's start talking about the content of Ancestor. Let me see. If I look at Ancestor in the broadest sense, I think for the first 3 chapters, I was on board and understanding what was going on, and I was intrigued about everything. Then I got to the 4th and final chapter. Wow. I mean, it takes a completely different direction. I mean, we're how many billion years in the future from the original story time?
15 to be precise.
Yes. I mean, it went in a direction I did not even expect. And, now granted, as you pointed out, each chapter goes in subsequent chapter goes in a direction that the previous didn't. It may have hinted at, and so that was intriguing to watch. But I think that 4th installment or the 4th chapter goes so far off on a completely different trajectory that it caught me off guard. What about you?
I think it did in terms of literally time and space, right? but I think in terms of once I got used to the extreme zigs and zags of each part from the first 3, I guess I wasn't entirely shocked. I was more shocked because, as I mentioned, I had actually read the first 2 in Island. And so I was sort of curious where it was going to end up as a story. And, if you'd told me after part 1 that this is where it end up at part 4, I guess not surprising for Malachi Ward or for something that's in a Brandon Graham anthology, but just surprising in the sense that if I was authoring it, I would never have gone there. But it fits. I mean, it seems to, again, even to touch back on some of the things that we were saying that were part of the Black Eye anthology, there seems to be a cyclical nature of some of the things that it's talking about that is sort of just extended, maybe ad infinitum at the end, but it definitely goes to a very different place visually as well,
Now, the first part of Ancestor, which is titled The Service, we're introduced to a character by the name of Peter, and when we first see him, he has visually what looks like little yellow clusters around his head, and basically what that represents is that he is in his brain is tapped into, I guess, something akin to the internet, but a very ramped up internet, what's called the service. And it's a way for him to interact on demand with information. So if he thinks of something, he can ask the service, so to speak, to call it up. It's kind of like doing a Google search, right? Yeah. But a Google search on steroids. Right. But this service is something that seems to bother him. He has a reaction to it, and it makes him a little dizzy. It seems to make him almost nauseated, that he has to stop and refocus himself every now and again. So this is the kind of futuristic world that we're introduced to. And then as we get into this first chapter, a friend of Peter's, Matheson, comes to pick him up. They're going to some event, and with them is a guy named Jim and a woman by the name of Anne. And so Peter is introduced to Anne, and so there's the potential of some kind of love interest between Peter and Anne. It's never really consummated that we can see, although in this kind of out-of-body manner in the last chapter. Who knows? I mean, maybe there is something between the two of them. But they're going to a gathering at the house of Patrick Whiteside. And when that is mentioned in the car ride over to Whiteside's, one of their friends, Jim, starts making disparaging comments about this Whiteside's guy, that he may be trouble, that he doesn't trust him. And so we're intrigued in this first chapter. Okay, who is Whiteside? And then we get into chapter 2, and we start seeing the kind of person that Patrick Whiteside seems to be.
Yeah. And he turns out to be, and I guess we can spoil up to that part. Maybe this first big pivot is a good, still explaining the premise of the book boundary. But Whiteside turns out to be almost a cult leader like, figure who has some kind of blocking. What do they call it? Some way that in his large estate, which is surrounded by security guards and very creepy, but he has some sort of blocking technology to prevent, and we should say, just to go back and add a little bit to more of the premise as you were describing it, Peter has this, what I describe as like a swarm of yellow around him that is, I think to me, a logical extension of where we're going with our smartphone technology and our body monitoring technology. And so, and it turns out he's not the only one, that everybody has it. And they all have this swarm of yellow sort of dots or blobs around their head that are feeding them data the way that our phones feed us information, like who's, who was in that film, right? My IMDb tells me instantly, or I want this music now, and it plays that music now. Or, my phone is always telling me that I haven't slept enough. And in the same way, his serotonin levels are being monitored and so on. So anyway, they go to Peter Whiteside's home, his complex, his estate, whatever. And the service, as that's called, that sort of logical extension of the internet that surrounds their heads, is actually shut off, right? And so his cult or whatever it is that he's doing here at this event is a sort of anti-service, at least it seems that way at first, a sort of anti-technology, get off this grid kind of bit of crazies.
Right, and when they get to Whiteside's home, there is this dampening field, and the people who are so used to being tapped into the system, constantly, are thrown off balance. I mean, some even physically feel dizzy. So, I mean, that what does that have to say about our obsession, if not addiction, to our own mobile devices and the way that it taps us into our own body functions? You mentioned, Fitbit, things of that sort. Yep. As well as, having to constantly look up things like from the Internet Movie Database or Google or Wikipedia when you need that information, right? So what do you do when you don't have all of that, at the tip of your finger, so to speak, or in the case of the characters in Ancestor, embedded into the very, neurological pathways of your brain?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, to spoil maybe that first swerve, just from the first part, you get a sense that this book is going to be about our technologies and in a way sort of anti-technology, in the sense that I think it seems like at the beginning, Peter doesn't even know if his that his headaches or his anxieties are being caused or at least contributed to by the service. He seems like he's like turning to the service, turning to its ability to monitor his body and its ability to play Dinah Washington's, What a Difference a Day Makes on call. He's turning to it for relief, but he doesn't necessarily he can't sort of get outside of himself to imagine that it's this swarm of constant data and information that might be contributing to his headache. That actually is so true to life for me, like my wife and I constantly staring at our smartphones as we shuffle around the house, making no eye contact with our, most loved person sitting right in front of us, trying to diagnose our own headaches while we, fail to get any sleep because we're staring at these glowing screens. And that just seems very present. So it seems like that first part is definite. It feels like a critique of that. But then the alternative that's presented by Whiteside is no more appealing, as he turns out to be a sort of threatening figure.
Yeah. Now, you described him as a cult leader. I would say he is like a Steve Jobs as a cult leader.
Yes,
because he has a background in the same kind of technology that defined Steve Jobs' life. But this guy is, I guess, kind of like Steve Jobs, very much a manipulator, a control freak. I don't know if it's unfair to call Steve Jobs a control freak, but he was someone who always wanted to call the shots. Again, from what I understand. But this is where Sheehan and Ward really ramp it up a bit, right? Because the Whiteside character turns out to be something much more dystopic than otherwise.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as far as the futurism of the book, if it's okay to dive into that at this point, I was struck by the fact that this is a very futuristic sort of premise, but it is a sort of not too far distant from what we're experiencing today. Those of us who are inundated by the internet and our smartphone technologies and all that kind of stuff. But two, that the characters don't actually look that futuristic, nor the settings. In fact, Peter's room, his bedroom, has a teddy bear in the corner still. You know what I mean? And so I feel like some of this is almost as if, one, this is not that far in the future as a possibility, so it very much is speaking to our present. But two, I wonder if part of what they're saying is that these technologies take us away from our physical reality so much and so quickly that we're not likely to spend much time revising our furnishings or our fashion because everything is sort of on the virtual space. Like I spend more of my time these days tweaking my electronics than I do picking up after my socks. And so
yeah, me too. That's kind of sad.
Yes. Yeah. And so maybe we make less progress in the next 20 years on, updating our jackets because we spend so much of our lives updating our apps.
Yeah. And, I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right in that, we have a world here that looks very familiar in terms of, let's say, setting and fashion, but yet the technology is something years and years beyond what we have going on now. Now, one way that I read this was that this is like an alternate reality. So it's where we would be culturally with the exception of the advancement of technology, especially, computer, networked technology. And the reason why I thought that this was maybe an alternate reality to our own is fairly early on. This is in the first chapter when we're introduced to Peter and he's in his room. You mentioned that it looks like, any room today, right? He has a bed, he has a teddy bear, he has his normal things. Right. At one point, he's standing against, I don't know, it's his door or a wall, and in the background is a poster, and that poster to me looks like a map. Maybe it's not a map, but I thought it's not a map. At first, I thought it was a map of a realm that didn't reflect anywhere on Earth, but now that I look closer at it, it looks to be an illustration of something.
Yes.
But I still do not think that undermines my theory of this being an alternate reality.
Yeah.
It's an alternate reality in the way that, let's say, Brian K. Vaughan and Marco Martin's The Private Eye was an alternate reality, right? And that also deals with technology. Now that was the after effect of this kind of technology. This is this kind of controlling, all-encompassing, network technology, and maybe the more perhaps positive things that come from this, because, and again, we don't want to give anything away that comes out of this final strange chapter, but it does take this whole idea of technology and the control over lives into a completely different direction than I would have anticipated. I would have thought that it would result in something much more harrowing, dystopic, I think is a good word, again, that I use. But no, there's something quite hopeful and potentially positive about the final chapter of Ancestor. Did you read it that way?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, when I read the first couple parts, I kept thinking of Foucault's Technologies of the Self. Sorry, I'm giving myself away as a grad. Anytime I mention Foucault, my wife just shakes her head. Puts her head in her hands and said, "What happened to my husband?" But anyway, the sort of like over programming of trying to manage the self, because the swarm seems dedicated to a kind of self betterment of body and mind and so forth, and so I felt like it was very much a commentary about society and culture. It becomes almost cosmological at the last part, and I do think hopeful in a sense, in that, well, again, not to give too much away, I think it's not a pure dystopia in where it goes. In fact, it sort of keeps taking the extension of where we're going and considers it from multiple sides. I think it keeps flipping on whether these are terrible things or these are or other terrible things are more terrible than these terrible things, I guess.
Now, it's interesting. You were reading this and you were reminded of Foucault. See, when I read this final chapter, I was reminded of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
And how that ends. And,
yes.
I mean, it's quite enigmatic.
Right.
But there's the possibility for a new beginning. I mean, obviously in 2001 with the fetus. And so there's something somewhat similar going on with Ancestor.
Sure, or Carl Sagan, actually, and some of the things that he's done that are sort of more speculative or even his fiction. Yeah.
So bringing Carl Sagan from the Process piece back into the conversation.
Picture. Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoyed this story. I don't know if I'll get the book now that I have the PDF, but I definitely think it's intriguing. And if our listeners have not encountered this story in the earlier issues of Island, that it's something that they should definitely check out later this month.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if any of what we're talking about sounds interesting, I think it's worth a read. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I would recommend it. However, other works that have similar themes, I don't know if you're reading Tokyo Ghost by Rick Remender. I think that's like a blockbuster movie version of these kind of themes, and right. I think this is more of it has more of a sort of independent weird feel, which
subdued.
I love. Yeah, more subdued, and I love that, and I recommend it. But I know some of my friends would shake their heads also, similar to my wife, at my endorsement of these things for that.
Well, Paul, do you want to get to the final title that we're discussing for this week?
Sure.
This is issue number 13 of Frontier, published by Youth in Decline. And we have talked about Frontier on previous episodes of the Comics Alternative. Sometimes we've done this during our Small Press Expo shows or the Ignatz Awards, because, Frontier has been up for Ignatz Awards in the past. Right. But I think most recently, Gene and I, this is earlier this year, reviewed issue number 12 of Frontier that was created by Kelly Kwong.
Yeah.
So how familiar are you with Frontier?
I'm as familiar as what you just talked about, because I checked out number 12 because you guys talked about it, and I liked it. And I love that there is a series that is spotlighting, is sort of giving a space to spotlight a creator. And, Frontier in its run has had some, I'm blanking on them right now, they're not coming to mind, but has had some really great creators. I know Jillian Tamaki, for instance. And so each issue does sort of feature I think a relatively shorter form work, but has really brought some amazing talent to bear.
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, if you go to the Youth in Decline website, you can see all of the Youth in Decline artists who have, or the artists who have who've done issues of Frontier. Now I mentioned the last issue was by Kelly Kwong, and then before that right. You had Eleanor Davis.
Right.
Michael DeForge before that, Becca Tobin, Anna DeFlorian, whose work I wasn't really familiar with before this, Julian Tamaki, Emily Carroll, issue number 6, Sam Alden, number 5, Ping Zhu, number 4, Sasha Homer, Frontier number 3, Helen Zhou is number 2, and then Uno Morales did Frontier number 1. So some of those may be names that you've never heard of before. Some of these, let's say like Emily Carroll and Eleanor Davis, are kind of almost household names in comics right now, along with Michael DeForge. Yeah,
and that's what makes me really excited to talk about this, because I had not known Richie Pope, who is the artist featured in Frontier 13. I had not known Richie Pope as a name before this, but of course, with a background like that, with what you just named, Frontier, knows how to pick them. And I realized after looking and actually coming to some of the biographical information that is at the end, that I'd seen his work in the New Yorker before, And so glad for the chance to be introduced to Richie Pope here.
Right. Yeah, Richie Pope is the creator for Frontier number 13. And, in this way, Frontier is a series very similar to the Rotland Dreadfuls, right? I mentioned earlier that each issue of the Rotland Dreadfuls is one creator doing his or her own thing. So you have something very similar going on with Frontier. Now, Richie Pope is primarily known as an illustrator more than as a comics artist. Now, you saw some of his work in The New Yorker. He's also done illustrative work for The New York Times, The Atlantic, and Scientific American, among other publications. Now, I haven't read this book, but I did see where he did the illustrations of a book titled Louis Armstrong, Jazz Legend, that came out from American Graphic in 2012. Had you heard of that?
I hadn't.
Yeah, I hadn't before, I looked it up. And on his website, he has a comic, it looks like a small comic, almost like a mini comic, called Nudini, which is a faux documentary. And I'm assuming that this is self-published because I wasn't able to find it on Amazon when I searched. So, but he's primarily known for his illustration work. And this issue, number 13 of Frontier, is titled Father-Son. And it is, let's say, an unusual story.
Yeah.
How would you describe this?
Well, there's a few things. Again, this is part of the cool experience of reading something like Frontier. So unfamiliar with his work, and actually unfamiliar with what might be thematically his concerns, I just dove into it pretty cold. And so I'm going to borrow from some of the words that he uses in the interview with him that is at the end of this issue of Frontier. So that's, I think, another thing Frontier does, right, is they have a fairly brief but really informative interview at the end with the creator. And so each page is kind of like it's almost like an instructional what do you call it, narration over his art. And his art is very sort of simple black line with these very candy colors is a phrase that he uses.
Right.
But it's all about Black fatherhood, as he says. He says he wanted to, this is from the interview at the back, wanted to play around with the gaze and experience around Black fatherhood, but done in a style that is, again, this sort of almost, very iconic, but with this simple white, these very candy-looking colors, and then this instructional narration at the top that's sort of explaining what you do with the father-son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you mentioned the interview in the back. We should point out that I don't think all of the issues of Frontier, but in many of them, especially the more recent ones, Ryan, the publisher of Youth in Decline, does a brief interview with the creator for that issue. And these are no more than just one page. And so that's, where you get some of this context here of what he was doing. So when we open this issue of Frontier, the very first page, we see what looks like a package of something. And on the front it says Father Son, and the letters S-O-N at the very end are in those candy colors, the kind of candy red, yellow, and then blue. And then inset in this box looks to be almost like a doll of some sort when you first see this. But then you turn the page and get to the first part of the first panel of the story. And you're right, this is written like an instructional. So in this first panel, we read, fill the bathtub with warm water and toss the tablet in, letting it soak for approximately 1 hour. Well, the thing that is in the water, the tablet, is what I had described earlier as a doll-like figure. So this is a figure that's actually a dissolvable tablet. Then that next panel, be careful not to cause any turbulence to the water during this activation period, as that could result in unintended deformities or psychological flaws. Third panel, once activation is complete, your father-son will awaken on its own. It's so simple, and there are so many variations. Okay, so those first 3 panels of the story proper basically give you the premise of this issue of Frontier, Father-Son, that you can create something called a father-son that comes in tablet form. You dip it in water like a bathtub. It dissolves, and it turns into a humanoid figure, which is called the Father-Son. And then the rest of the book is devoted to these many variations. That are mentioned. So, father-sons can be this way or that way or another way or a combination of way. They can hang out with other father-sons. They can create their own father-sons, which would make that your grandfather-son. So, it gets quite elaborate. But in essence, what Pope is doing here is he's discussing the various possibilities and manifestations of African American fatherhood. In other words, he's demonstrating something that, unfortunately, one of our presidential candidates is not aware of, that there is not one monolithic African-American experience, that there's a variety of different experiences and different personalities and different systems.
Yeah, which candidate are you referring to? I'm just kidding.
I think it's the male who's running. I can't remember his name. He's, he doesn't do much that's flamboyant enough for me to remember. But basically, what getting back to Frontier number 13, what Richie Pope is doing is talking about the many different manifestations, some better than others, of African American manhood.
Yes, yeah, and again, coming into it cold, right? I hadn't known that this was the subject. Obviously it being titled Father-Son, I assumed it had something to do about fatherhood or manhood. There's that premise that you described about the pill, and I'd love to come back to that. But then when these variations start becoming described, some father-sons eat nothing but raw meat. The second one, so they can do nothing but lift weights. And there's this hilarious picture of this father-son lifting gigantic weights, and his biceps have a face on them each that is also sweating. But
the father-son in this book, they all have mustaches.
They all have, I guess what you might say is sort of a black man, a black father kind of mustache that, I know some folks who are African-American fathers who have a similar, very cool mustache that I could only aspire to growing myself. But it really wasn't until the next one, some father-sons will ball you up, and there's a picture of this father-son in a do-rag dunking a basketball, while the next one, while others will get exposed and their ankles broken. That it occurred to me that this is a father-son, this is about fatherhood and men who might ball you up, meaning hooping basketball. And actually, it really wasn't, to be honest, until that point when the notion that we might be talking about specifically African-American fatherhood, became a possibility for me. And then reading forward, obviously, I was like, okay, clearly we're talking about fatherhood and manhood, but we're also talking in some specific ways about about African American fathers, and and so that kind of becomes clearer as it goes on with these different variations. And I recognized that, here's an artist, commenting specifically about the construction of Black manhood or Black fatherhood, or at least, how he sees it around him.
Right. And some of these representations of fatherhood could be positive or negative. I mean, for instance, in the first half of the book, some father-sons smoke menthol after menthol for no reason other than to pass the time. Right. Some father-sons act childish and reckless for no other reason than to pass the time. Right. But then you have others that are more constructive, who build houses on top of the houses that you're already living in. Sometimes right. the rooms are too small. And, some father-sons will simply be upset. They may never tell you why. Pay attention to their body language and know when it's best to just get out of their way. But then we get, and to me, one of the more poignant parts of this issue of Frontier is some father-sons find friendship in others like them. These father-sons run free. Some groups of father-sons stay out in the streets at night, fighting anyone who tests them. Some father-sons run so far they forget where they are. Others run so far they forget who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more that comes after, but I don't know, this series of pages about the father-sons that run free and run far and forget where and even who they are, I mean, those struck me as some of the most poignant observations in this issue of Frontier.
Yeah. And I kind of went back and forth about the specificity of this being about African-American fathers and the, more generalizable sort of father figures, period, in our cultures, where there's a kind of ambivalence, but I think in the end, definitely honors the kinds of things that you might be going through as a father, or at least the different ways that you might see a father figure. One of them I think that was interesting was, and I wonder what your read of this is, just the whole idea that it's a tablet that you drop in water. To get this father-son, and the whole idea of this sort of almost like sales kind of narrative about what that is saying about fatherhood. I remember as a kid being at the grocery store and having it was this little capsule you drop in the water and it would be a dinosaur would pop out.
Yeah.
And I was so excited about that. Like, as a naive kid, I imagined this like, this dinosaur toy would pop out. And it really was just a piece of foam. Like the capsule was just a foam cut out in a Tyrannosaurus. And so I kept thinking about whether this father-son being in a tablet meant that it was disposable, On the other hand, sometimes things that come in tablets are actually indispensable. They're like the relief that you need because it's the cure for what ails you. And I guess I kept thinking, like, what is this saying about fathers that it's coming in this form?
Yeah. See, I tend to think that it may be more on the disposable side from what you just described, because at the very end here, and this is not giving away any spoilers. This is not the kind of comic where spoilers really come into play. But the last couple of panels, it says, you never know which father-son you're going to get, so enjoy. If your father-son doesn't provide what you need, you can always return them for credit toward another. Okay, so in that way, they're going to be really interchangeable. And, the way that I'm looking at, outside of issues of race, and I want to come back to this topic of race in a moment, but outside of the racial issue, when I think of the way that this is written like an instruction manual, that father-sons come in tablets, that, you put in water and you get what you want, and if not, you can take back for credit toward another. I don't know if it's telling us about fatherhood or about how offspring view fatherhood, because if we look at it from the offspring's point of view, what we as sons and daughters make of our fathers is what the fathers become for us. And in many ways, what the fathers become for us, especially after the fact, could be completely different from the person who was the actual father. In other words, we may not know the real person underneath the facade of father, right? But what that father did in the guise and role of a father impacts us in such a way that we create kind of our own narrative of who this father is. And so the power is on the offspring, the son and daughter, and, maybe even other members of the family, the non-fathers, to define who the father is. And so in this way, the power of defining fatherhood is taken out of the hands of the father into the other members of the family.
Yeah, that's intriguing. I'm definitely with you on that. And one of the things that kind of aligns with that I was thinking about was the ways that if this is about how the sons or children, or even we could say society outside of fathers see fathers, because I think part of what it is to be a tablet is to say that it's become kind of denaturalized or whatever, sort of like vacated of kind of natural substance. And, I think about what it means to be, what fatherhood means, like as a signifier, I don't know, in our time, and how it's kind of been vacated of some of its, obviously, bad associations or bad meanings that we've attached to it. But, this is a real question that I live with day to day, is what does it mean for me to be a father in these times, after feminism and after we've sort of, in good ways questioned and critiqued simple patriarchal notions of fatherhood. But then what do you fill that with instead? And I wonder if some of the candy coloring and the sort of playful instructional narrative is a little bit about how we've kind of vacated that signifier as a society, or as sons, even, in the way that we're supposed to think about our fathers. What am I supposed to expect of my father, if not, father knows best, and so on?
Right. I want to come back to the issue of race, because, as you pointed out, if you didn't know who Ricky Pope was, you wouldn't know that he's African American until you get to the end with the interview with Ryan, the publisher. And he mentions this. Let me ask you this. If you did not know that the creator, Richie Pope, was African American, could you read what we have in issue number 13, minus the interview, Father-Son, as something that is much more general? In other words, a general comment about fatherhood, regardless of race, ethnicity, and all that? Or would there still be something, let's say, black or African American about that narrative?
Yeah. First, that's a great question. And I think it is kind of a question I share and would hold. So nothing I say here I would assert too heavily, especially from my ignorance and position as a Chinese American man. But I do think there are some giveaways throughout. And I guess what I'd say first in answer to your question is my reading of it is that Pope is talking about fatherhood generally. So there are things that even as a Chinese American man, I think, reflect on my thinking about fatherhood as a position, as I just sort of described. But also there are things that are specific to Black fatherhood and perhaps Black manhood, at least in American society, probably more widely too, because of the ways that, the Black family is constructed in the media or talked about, i.e. in a certain presidential candidate's descriptions of the inner cities where, there's destitute, ruin, murder, and violence, for instance. And so, I think ruminations on Black fatherhood and Black manhood are some of the most sophisticated thoughts about the struggle of figuring out who you are as a father or figuring out who your father is that I've ever read. I actually just finished a rereading of Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so I think often about not just about fatherhood generally in these times, but also about the specificities of being an African-American father in a time and place where, you're being assailed all the times with expectations, media images, stereotypes, and so forth about who you can and cannot be and how that shapes, your perception of yourself as a father.
Yeah.
Does that? Yeah. So yes and no about whether or not it's specific to Black fathers.
Well, I guess what I was asking is, And again, there's no way of knowing this, right? Because you can't unread Frontier number 13 and then read it afresh without any context whatsoever.
Sure.
But if you take out that interview at the back and you did not know in any way if Richie Pope was African American, is there anything about this issue of Frontier, the story, Father-Son, that suggests that this is African American specific?
Well, I will say this. That point that I read where some father-sons will ball you up and others will get exposed and their ankles broken. I don't think my dad has ever balled up or broken any ankles. By the way, for those who don't know, ankles broken is street ball language for when, somebody performs a crossover that's so devastating that their defender falls to the floor. So, I mean, and there's other bits here that are really sort of brief linguistic giveaways about at least a specific, cultural source, if not specifically African American. For instance, at the museum, the father-son says, "That boy good right there," which you could kind of hear, bits of the vernacular. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that to a point. But even that example at the museum didn't strike me as necessarily, culturally, racially specific. But I agree with you that the part, some fathers will ball you up while others will get exposed and their ankles broken. And then the do-rag on that next page.
Right.
Okay, that does suggest that we're talking about a particular ethnic community and not a more general understanding of fathers.
Right.
So other than that, though, I think you could read Father-Son, issue number 13 of Frontier, and see it talking about fatherhood and the role of the father and father's identity, its place in society, in a broader sense, without taking away from the specificity of the African American experience. In other words, this is something that is definitely culturally, racially specific, but at the same time is applicable beyond those confines.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to recommend it. It's a pretty short work, and I would, and we've already covered quite a lot of it, but I'm still going to buy it, and I'm actually the person that I'm thinking of giving it to is my brother, because we think oftentimes together about fatherhood, especially about the position that somebody like my father, in a Chinese immigrant, in a swirl, between where he was as a kid and where he lives today. That whole thing that I was saying about how all your expectations about what fatherhood means has been totally vacated, even in terms of how your children respect you or whatever. I want to give this to my brother as just another sort of piece of art and culture to really make us think a little bit about how difficult it is to navigate those waters of how do you be a father in these times, and obviously we're not black, so I think there's something to take away, sort of regardless. But I agree that there is a specificity there that's important to keep into the text.
Right. Mm-hmm. Looking at this Youth in Decline page and the description of Frontier number 13, I've just noticed that they have a 1-2 sentence bio of Richie Pope, and it says that he recently moved from Richmond, Virginia to Dallas, Texas.
Hey.
So, I ought to look him up.
You should. And it would be really interesting to hear from Mr. Pope about the work and his work generally. I'm actually super interested also in illustrators who are doing comics. I feel like, obviously historically that line has always been blurry, but I do encounter a lot of independent comics artists who also do quite a lot of illustration work. And then again, every time I pick up a New Yorker, I'm looking at Chris Ware, or I'm looking at the comics artists that I read all the time.
And also, before we move off of Frontier number 13, we should thank again Ryan at Youth in Decline. Over the past year and a half, he has definitely kept us in the comics. He alerts us every time a new issue of Frontier or a Youth in Decline book comes out. So thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, Paul, we had a fruitful discussion for this week's episode. We started off with the current Indiegogo campaign, Black Eye number 3, an anthology edited by the publisher of Rotland Press, Ryan Standfest. After that, we looked at Ancestor by Matt Sheehan and Malachi Ward. And then we wrapped up with Ryan Pope's Frontier number 13.
It was fun. I really enjoyed reading these comics, and always ultra enjoy. I always say this, but it never diminishes how much it's an honor to talk to you, Derek, about comics. It's cool to be in this seat.
Oh, well, it's great to have you on as a co-host. I enjoy the times that we've done this, and will continue to do so.
Yep.
So I know you have your own podcast and your own dissertation to write, but every now and again when you find a little time, I hope you can help us out over here at the Comics Alternative podcast.
Totally. It's a treat.
Yeah. And if you want to find treats such as the ones as Paul and I discussed on this week's episode, then you would do well to head over to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find incredible discounts every single month. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message from the comfort of your own desktop or portable computing device via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And you can email us at twoguys@comicsalternative.com, or to reach me directly, I'm Paul at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And of course, you can find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, and on iHeartRadio. And if you're an Android user, on Google Play Music. But you can still find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. So a lot of ways for people to reach us and let us know what they're reading.
Yep. You have no excuses. Reach out to us.
And again, we want to recommend that you head on over to Indiegogo and back Black Eye number 3. You will not be disappointed. It's a fun book.
That's right.
Yeah. And until next week, I'm Derek.
And I'm Paul.
We'll see you later.
See you.